Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning from a sunny golden day here in Alexandria, Virginia. We've got the daffodils in mass. It's beautiful here in Washington, D.C. I'm Riki Ellison. I'm the founder and chairman of the Missile Defense Advocacy Alliance. We have one single mission, and that is to make our world and our nation safer through the deployment, the evolution of missile defense. This is our 70th virtual boost phase missile defense from space. The timing of this is golden. And we have two of the world and our national experts in space defense. I'm just excited, very excited as a young kid way back in 1985. Was after our Super Bowl victory, I got hired to work on the exo-atmospheric reentry interceptor system, IRIS, out of Sunnyvale. And that's my connection with Mike, going all the way back there on that, as he was the genius behind the Clementine experiment and the movement of that first generational GBI that is now the NGI aspect of it. We have, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Mike Griffin, who is been through the entire generational history of our missile defense, all the way back from SDI, from SDIO, from BIMDO, MDAA, from Clementine, through all the elements that we've gone through here. He's also been remarkable in his courage to stand up to systems, as we knew in the past with RKV, and being able to tell the truth. And we are excited that he's here. He's also was with us with President Trump as the head of R&E, and prior with George W. Bush as the head of NASA for that. We also have Lisa here, Dr. Lisa Porter, who is equally the world expert from our perspective, Lisa, on non-kinetic and left of launch. And a lot of that is a secret, but this is not just a kinetic energy solution. It is both, and we're just honored to have her here to speak to us today. So we are 8 days away from the executive order report that is due 8 days from now on that. And I think it's very important that we look at that executive order, and specifically the section 3, which is an implementation that has this report due in 8 days. I believe this is still very fluid. It is going to be fluid even after those 8 days. It's going to be going into the DoD. They're going to be fluid. But there are 4 key points here that we want to discuss on that plan that was listed by the president. So the first one is defense of the United States against ballistic, hypersonic, advanced cruise missiles, and other next generation aerial attacks from peer, near peer, and rogue adversaries. Can we do that? What's doable? What's the cost of that? When can we have that? The third point there is the development and deployment of proliferated space-based interceptors capable of boost phase intercept. That is huge. Same questions. How much is this? Is this doable? Can it be done? The fourth point is the development and deployment of capabilities to defeat missile attacks prior to launch and in the boost phase. And the last point, development and deployment of non-kinetic capabilities to augment the kinetic defeat of ballistic, hypersonic, advanced cruise missiles and other next generational aerial attacks. So that's the architecture. That's a big ask in 60 days for anybody to come up with that. And everybody, I think, wants to know if this is real, if this is a ridiculous amount of money, it's doable. Can we have something in 18 months that says we're going down this path? And at the end of it, is this, what's the right architecture if you have a chance? So I'd like to go with you, Mike, first to take a shot at some of those questions on this.
Thanks, Riki. As you've emphasized, I am an old, with all emphasis, old kinetic guy. So I'll confine my remarks to that area and some of the other ways that one might interfere with boost phase. Lisa will take up in a few moments. But I want to start out by, frankly, expressing my concern about the title of this talk, Boost Phase Missile Defense from Space and Boost Phase Interceptors from Space, as outlined in the EO. Now, I'm hugely supportive of the EO as, again, an old missile defense guy. And I would remind everybody that in the end, the purpose of defense is to cut some casualties, cut your losses, and to buy time. That the perfect defense just gets you back to even. It doesn't do anything to dissuade the attacker. So let's keep defense in its proper place. We also need offense. We don't have the kinds of offense we need, by that which I mean long range, kinetic, non-nuclear, conventional strike. We're working on it, but that's a key part of the future because it has to be paired with defense to create an effective deterrent. So let me, having put that card on the table, I want to return to the issue of boost phase defense from space. Most people, when they think about space-based defense, they immediately default to interceptors. Space-based interceptors have statistically, and this goes all the way back to brilliant pebbles and singlet interceptors, you almost never, by that I mean sub 1% or so, you almost never have a shot from space at an actual ICBM booster. The easiest shot we would have ever had to take would have been against the Russian SS-18, which was a long burn liquid booster carrying, I think, if I recall correctly, 10 warheads. It was just a monstrous weapon. That flew long enough that you could get a shot at it with not a very high probability, but some probability. Even in the Brilliant Pebbles days when that architecture was on the table, we were most of the shots you would have would be at the post-boost vehicle.
Okay.
And it's important to remember that. Not that you wouldn't take that. You're happy to have a shot at a post-boost vehicle.
There's some narrative out there the first 4 minutes that we can do something. So this is why this needs to be cleared up on this.
In most cases, within in most cases, there are always some, but in most cases, you do not have a shot from space at an ICBM in the boost phase. You can't get to it with reasonable probability, and by reasonable probability, I would say greater than 1% or so.
And this is physics. This is not engineering. This is physics.
It's just, you don't.
So you can't overcome laws of physics no matter how good an engineer you are.
So if you can't get to it, then from space, what are you shooting at? And I'm hardly the guy who would be against space-based defense. Don't get. I want to use it to shoot at what you can shoot at.
Yep.
What is available for you to shoot at is regrettably mid-course objects. Okay, it would be nice to be able to say that you had a shot at boost phase. Generally speaking, you don't.
Would you go back to the ABL?
No.
That's not a solution, but we did do that, right? We proved we could do it, but that's not doing
it was the one. I don't want to get off into airborne laser or space-based laser because I just don't think that as weapons those are credible. I don't think they're technically credible.
Okay, well, we'll just move on to
and we can have a discussion about that. But for now, I want to focus on when people talk about space-based intercept, they really mean interceptors. Interceptors can reach with good probability can reach mid-course objects. You have a mid-course object in a 15 or 20 minute flight time, and in that period of time, 20% of a space-based constellation will sweep through the battle space. The problem with mid-course is as it has been from the earliest days of missile defense, which thing is the RV and which thing is the decoy. That's I'll take as minor offshoot. That's the value of the lower end Aegis and later THAAD defenses, is the decoys have been stripped out. But in the long mid-course phase, your problem is discrimination. Space-based intercept is a trade. It's a system trade against, do I want to do that from space? Go against a mid-course object. Do I want to do it from space? Do I want to do it from the ground? Do I want to do it from both? Okay. To confuse and confound the enemy and give them more problems to solve. Those are legitimate questions to ask. But if you look at the physics of the problem, you can hardly ever get to a shot from space at an ICBM booster. And I will absolutely also put on the table that the probabilities are even lower for submarine launch ballistic missiles, because they just don't get high enough for long enough. And boost phase defense against a hypersonic is just not possible at all. You're just not going to get it. It flies too low.
What about the fractional orbital, the FOBs?
A fractional orbital bombardment scheme puts a hypersonic missile in orbit, and if you see it in orbit, yes, you could get it. An orbital target is a good target for another orbital interceptor. The point to remember is that boost phase defense, as it is normally talked about, the booster doesn't get to orbit.
Can you distinguish the late ascent of the boost phase as part of that, or do you're crossing
the only shots you ever have in boost phase intercept are late in the second stage, if you have
so
that.
you still think that probability is still not worth
I know it's very low.
Okay, so we need to spend our money not on that.
You need to spend your money on what is doable.
Right. That's the discussion here. We're trying to help this along a little bit. So thank you.
So from a kinetic perspective,
yeah,
I have seen and participated in studies on this going back 40 years. Right. Okay. You do not have, it is not worth spending your money on a space interceptor constellation that is targeting the boost phase.
Okay. That's 40 years ago when we, and in the discrimination part of this, I would think, most people think that we'd be much better to discriminate with new technologies now just to find the decoys from the RVs in space. Is that?
I don't want to go down the discrimination rat hole, because I would not agree that we're much better at that than we ever were.
Really? Okay.
I just wouldn't agree that we know a lot about discrimination.
Can you go into the space to space if, CubeSats or ability to put an object from space in front of that kill vehicle that's going forward, or what would be the way to do this in space?
Well, if you have a space-based intercept constellation, it can go against other objects in space.
Okay. And
now you're arguing about how many interceptors do I have to deploy to have good access to the battle space on the number of targets I want to go after. And that's a relatively, it's complicated, but it's a relatively straightforward system trade.
And that's got a much higher percentage of success, or from your perspective on this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
What would that entail? Is that 8,000 satellite? Not big numbers.
I don't know. You first have to figure out what problem you're trying to solve. So what size raid do you postulate? Okay. How many do you want to take out from space versus leave to the underlayers? We have to think about layered defense. Again, sitting here in front of the TV today, we can't size that constellation, but
it's not going to be small.
It's not small. It's not cheap, but it is technically feasible to have orbital interceptors going after targets that are in orbit or in a high mid-course flight.
How long would it take if they're going to? What's your thought on investing correctly, and how long would it take to be able to have a capability up there to do that?
Well, it would be, even with a crash program, it would be measured in years. It's not measured it's not measured in months, 18 months or 24 months. That's not a feasible target. If you go to recent experience, a space-based interceptor is not conceptually different from putting up another satellite, it just has a different purpose. So I believe SpaceX has orbited 7,000 or 8,000 Starlink satellites over the course of the last, 5 years? About.
Okay, so those numbers looking.
Those are numbers that are in the ballpark. I frankly would take my hat off to SpaceX for how many satellites they've put up in the time they've done it. I don't believe anything like that's been done before. So that's a good benchmark against how fast you could deploy thousands of satellites of any kind. It comes down to, leaving aside the purpose of the satellite, it comes down to mass on orbit, and numbers of satellites on orbit. So I think SpaceX's accomplishments represent.
What do you think that would cost? So I mean, what do you think the cost would be over those years to get, say, 10,000 of these up there?
I'm not carrying those figures around in my head, but if you go, it would be an easy calculation on a spreadsheet to go back and say how many Falcon 9 launches have deployed, how many Starlink satellites, how many, 20 or 30 go with each launch. The cost of the booster is, I think SpaceX advertises $60 to $70 million for a launch. Maybe in quantity it might be lower. So if you said, I need 3,000 satellites and they can carry 30 at a time, and it's $60 million for a launch, well, you can do the math. That would get you in the ballpark.
What about the actual technology inside the vehicle, like an NGI? Well, that's the cost of this or not?
Of course, that goes into the cost, but the cost, I think, would be comparable to the cost of today's EKV or today's
NGI.
the upcoming NGI. Well, the EKV is what's in the ground now.
Yeah,
you're probably talking about long wave infrared to be able to see the midcourse object against the dark sky. You're talking about similar divert capabilities. You're just basing them in space. Instead of having a big booster on the ground sitting in a hole in Alaska or Vandenberg, you're talking about.
And would that be obviously cheaper than $100 million?
That's a cost trade yet to be done.
That's what they're going to.
Silos and boosters are not free.
Yeah.
Launch to space is not free.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you, as a system architect, do you get something from having a dual mode deployment of defense? I think you probably do. You have to cost it out and see if what you get is worth the money to you, but you can.
And sustainment costs of space have to be factored in. You have to replenish.
Yep, sustainment in space is a big deal.
We always forget on cost what the O&M tail is, and doesn't matter what the system is. You always forget that.
We do a Clementine type of experiment in under 2 years where you have a space up there to do an intercept on a test ICBM.
You can certainly do a Clementine type test or a Delta 180 type test or a Delta 181 or Delta 183 type test in a couple of years. We did those things.
Yeah,
this nation has done those things.
Okay.
You can't deploy, I'm just going to say bluntly, you can't deploy a full up constellation in a couple of years.
But you can prove it, right? You can prove, like we did with the Clementine, if you go back to the earlier discussion of deterrence, of what you did to the Soviet Union, this is the same thing, I think, in that perspective, because China's ahead of us a little bit on some things.
You can do informative and interesting tests in a couple of years. Yes.
Okay.
One of a kind prototypes. Yeah. But maybe we should get off the kinetic stuff and have a chance to transition to something.
Just one more thing before. How would you balance because there's the narrative out there that's saying, hey, we don't need the NGI. We'll get if we have space. I'm just a little perspective from your viewpoint, and those are very expensive. And we have very little of them. Go ahead.
Well, I can only offer my perspective is that My assessment is that defense in depth is what is required. So if we say we're going to put up space-based defenses, which includes the sensors that provide the fire control, which is a whole another thing, then that layer, even if it's quite effective, won't get everything. The Aegis underlay is very capable. Okay, it has proven itself.
Yep.
We would need many more of them, but I would not want an architecture that did not have the Aegis SM32A and later 2B underlay. I would not want an architecture that did not have THAAD, the successor to the Iris that you worked on. I would not want an architecture that did not have Patriot PAC-3 and beyond. If you want a golden dome, then you have to give yourself every shot you can. And then, by the way, and Lisa will probably talk about this, you have to think about how you want to integrate the command and control of that architecture, which we have never done.
Right. That's it. Joe,
we've never done.
So that when they talk about bubbles, that's what we're talking about. The word "each in the shore" is the wrong word, but putting SM3s on the ground in the United States.
On the ground, on ships
is important to do.
It's critical because one layer will, if you give the adversary one layer, they have one problem to solve. Okay. In the horrible event that China and or Russia or China and Russia together decide they want to attack the United States with nuclear capability, then I don't want to rely on one layer.
All right, Lisa.
Oh,
this is the fun part where, this is where the public, they don't get to talk about what you know and how you supplement. We're not talking, and Mike's point in the beginning, we're not just defense, we're offense too.
Right.
But we got to get the defense right a little bit to get going. But this is a delicate subject, but it's also good for people to understand what else is out there besides kinetic options to defeat.
And I'll just to hammer on a point Mike was ending with, because I think it is really important. The best defense is a good offense. So for those who think we should reallocate our focus only on defense from space at the detriment of having our upping our opportunities with Aegis, PAC, THAAD, I think that's completely misguided, because if you invest in your terminal defense systems, and Aegis in particular, a very impressive system, you're obviously also investing in the production that we need to accelerate for our offensive capabilities, which has been, frankly, not nearly impressive enough, let's say, in the past few years. So I think now you're seeing this excitement so around not just your traditional incumbents, but a lot of new players who want to contribute to the offensive side. So to me, I look at this EO as a call to action to ensure we have a good offense as well as defense. To Mike's point, we want to tell them, you're going to have holy terror raining down on you if you try to do anything to us, not just we're going to sit here and, do our best to defend.
Has the policy allowed this now to do this?
I'm not a policy person, so I don't want to comment on policy. I just want to say from a technology perspective, if I'm going to invest in capability to defend at the THAAD and Patriot and Aegis level, I'm naturally developing capabilities that allow me to have a more robust offense, which I think is excellent.
And with that going back to rods from God and that kind of stuff.
Well, that would be more ground-based, but still the same point, right? I mean, you brought up the FOB capability that China has demonstrated. The Indo-PACOM theater is at significant risk right now from the Chinese hypersonic threat. We need a lot of hypersonic capability over there to counter that threat, and that's where I'm saying the best defense can be a good offense. But that aside, let me talk about non-kinetic for a while. And it's not really non-kinetic so much as I was lucky enough to spend time in the intelligence community. And one of the things I learned there is they try to think about their mission as, if we do our job right, there will not be a war ever. Now, that I shouldn't put it quite that way, because then that begs the question of how well they've done their job. But that aside, that's the focus. And what they really mean by that is, if you know enough and you understand enough, you can take the right actions to deter and create enough chaos and uncertainty in the adversary that they're never going to take that first shot. Because frankly, if they take that first shot, it's going to be a bad day. We don't even want to get close to that point. And so it's more important, I think, to sort of use an analogy, it's more important to play chess than checkers, right? So we need to think about what would an adversary have to be a credible threat against the US and particularly against CONUS, right? Well, it would be the same kinds of things we would need if we were developing an offense. And we understand that very well. And part of what we know about the space domain is they're going to rely on space for eyes in the sky, for command and control, and for IF2, which includes IF2 updates. They're going to rely on all the things that we know they're going to need to do. So think about that battle space and say, rather than focusing on T0 when they've already launched and you're trying to get after boost and you're extremely low probability, why don't we make it a situation where they are so unsure of what we can do to them ahead of time that they're never going to take a shot? And by that, I specifically mean, think about the assets still have in space for IF2, right? In-flight target updates that they're going to need to have. How are those going to position those satellites? We're going to know where those are. We can do a demonstration to show them we can take your IF2 satellites out anytime we
So
want.
you're saying that that type of development demonstrations and testing should be included in the.
Yes, and that's something we could do in a nearer term, I would
You're
argue.
referring to a little bit.
Yes, so you were talking about what could be done in 18 months,
Yeah.
and you were pulling on, I think correctly, what kind of demonstrations can we show our adversaries that we're capable of now, so they don't even think about messing with us? Because if they seriously think, let's show them what we can do. I think one of the things we want to remind them of, by the way, we can deploy right now capabilities to take out whatever you think you're going to use in space to attack us. And they're going to need to use space to attack us because we will know where their other ground station IF2 sites are, for example. We'll take those out. Do you see what I'm saying?
I see
So this focus on offense versus defense in the cyber world, the best capabilities come about when people realize you've got to share the information and you got to share the mindset of how do I operate as an offense? How do I take all the knowledge I understand there and now think about a defense against that? And that allows you to move T0 way back.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying?
I got what you're saying.
Okay.
Let me just go a couple of things on that, because you're right on the nuclear level, but you're seeing adversaries go underneath those technologies with cruise missiles, with drones. So how do you?
They still need updates if they're going to attack.
So you're jamming everything that they're talking.
You're jamming, you're attacking, you're making it clear. Look, you have any asset in space that guides your missile, that guides your drone, that guides your hypersonic. All of those things are going to need guidance. All of them. In an EW contested environment, do you think we're not going to contribute to EW? We're always talking about what they're going to do to us. Anything they do to us, we're going to do to them. And they know that. And so they are going to have seekers. They're going to have IF2 capability. They're going to understand that has to be distributed. We're going to say, we know you're going to have that. We're going to take it out before you ever press go. And now you've got the deterrence, because how are they going to know they can actually act effectively if they know you can take out their stuff? Do you see what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying.
So I think that's why people get excited about the boost phase.
Let's
They got to think it. We think that objective.
But now you mentioned how in the heck are we going to merge these two? We're not doing it, right? And the joint seems to fail on it. It's very difficult doing joint things.
It is
with our and part of the Golden Dome is they're looking at restructuring how to build this with offense, defense. I would assume with both of them.
They need to think about it that way. Yes. I would argue.
And then okay, so you want to have an opinion on how that should be done? Do you think you need to have a 4-star billet? Do you think you need to have a task force? What do we need to get this thing?
The last thing you want is another task force. And whatever they do, please don't do a cross-functional team. Oh my God, those things are a waste of time.
But I think that's what's happening.
Well, don't do that crap.
I think that's what.
When we were in the building, thank God we didn't have a Space Force cross-functional team. It was hard enough just getting the Space Force stood up, not to mention SDA, not to mention the fact we just ignored all that crap. You have to move out of that bureaucratic mindset of we need a bunch of people in the room talking.
So how do we do that?
No.
Just
you need to identify someone, and I would say 4-star or somebody who is fully empowered. Okay. Perhaps 3-star.
Beyond
that person has
acquisition and development.
That person has to be empowered.
Bigger than that. You break this down.
My opinion, this is really important. This EO is awesome in terms of its intent.
Yeah.
Okay. It is sending a message to China and Russia. Don't F with us. Okay. We're serious. Awesome. We need a really high ranking person who has the president's ear, who's in charge of it. And then you need probably a civilian level deputy, whatever you want to call them, that person has to have the technical chops. You need like a 40-year-old Mike Griffin. Okay, sorry. He's a little older than 40. You need somebody with enough scars that's actually been to this show before, but is young enough to like really see the
Let me
future.
explain that. So that 4-star, is that an acquisition development officer or is that a commander? What is that?
It's somebody who understands how to get stuff done. It's the equivalent of in Trump 1 when we had a COVID problem and he was like, we got to fix this. We got to get a vaccine. What did he do? He put a get stuff done guy in charge,
He put
right?
Gus Perna in.
Yeah.
And
Gus,
and 9 months after we declared a problem, we had vaccines.
I mean, it's amazing. That's what we need. This is the equivalent of that. This is like the COVID vaccine. Nobody thought you could do that in 9 months. Nobody.
So would
this
you
is
say
put
right
someone like
now,
that in charge.
there is out there that, this is very much like what happened in Guam for 5 years recently on the bureaucracy aspect of it. Is that-
I'll give you examples of the kind of person.
And I'm sorry if my language is too
You're good.
salty.
You're in a locker
I'm
room.
from Boston. I'm just going to say.
Well, I'm worse than he is. You need the kind of national attention that caused the leaders of that time, the Trevor Gardners in DOD, to put Benny Schriever in charge of the ICBM program, to put Hyman Rickover in
Yes.
charge of
Yes.
nuclear submarines,
Exactly.
to put Wayne Meyer in charge of Aegis, to
Yes,
put
exactly.
Red Rayborn in charge of ballistic missile submarine development, frankly, to put General Jim Abramson in charge of SDIO in the early years.
Exactly.
Now, you mentioned the level of the person. Frankly, if it's not a 4-star, then it's a 3-star, and 3 stars get coffee for 4 stars. Sorry to be so blunt,
Yeah.
but that's how it works.
Do we have a 4-star right now that could do this?
You can make one. Okay,
Yeah.
the president
Okay.
can make anybody that.
No,
you
but
want.
Yeah.
we have a
You
personality
have to
like
find,
that.
you need to
Yes,
find the right
It's the
person.
person, not the.
And
yes.
it doesn't matter actually if it's a military rank or
Right.
if it is a
Yeah.
Senate
Equivalent civilian.
appointed
Yeah.
and confirmed civilian.
Yep.
It's about the quality of the person
And then them being empowered to do the
and
job.
empowered to do the job
Yep.
with an organization. If you want a golden dome and you
Yep.
want it in a timely way,
That's what
they have to
Yeah.
have the money, they have to have the authority, they have to have the chops.
And then they need a small technical set of people, frankly, like a Mike Griffin team, who will tell them the truth, who will say, sir, don't go after boost phase intercept. That's going to be the thing that wastes your effort. Let's focus on this part, right? They need people who are going to say, this is technically what's credible.
How would you fit MDA in this, SDA, or would they be?
Undetermined. You have to figure that. That's part of the task, is to figure out what pieces of those organizations you want and which ones you don't.
Okay, and then which COCOM was this a Northcom problem? Is this a SpaceCom problem? Is this a StratCom command for this whole thing? Or you don't?
I don't think you know yet. I mean, how do you know? What are your criteria for knowing?
The defense of the U.S. homeland, I would assume, but he's got Northcom and StratCom and that XO, but I'm just curious on that, with the deterrent part of it. Yeah.
Riki, it involves space, it involves airborne, it involves seaborne, it involves land-based assets. That it needs to be put together in a new way to solve the problem, not with a preconception about what COCOM is going to do what, or what existing organization is going to do what.
I mean, this is a classic team of teams. You put the best people in charge. If you put a, 4-star who was the equivalent of Rickover in the Navy in charge, and you say, you're in charge, go get your team and make this happen. That person, by virtue of who they are, will attract the best. They will know who in the MDA, which team of MDA people they're pulling in. They're going to know who in the space, and they're going to, guys, step 1 is let's figure out what we're going to go do. And we have to nail that down. And then step 2 is go do it. This is how you get stuff done in a bureaucracy. And we've done it. So I know this is doable. When people ask us, how did you do this and that? We didn't care about rank. We cared about capability. We cared about who could do what. And we cared about empowering those best people to go get the job done.
So let's go back to Abramson. What happened? Why didn't we get that thing beyond? Can we take lessons learned from
Well,
our history, from the missile defense history on
Space-based defenses were certainly contemplated in the SDIO years, along with ground-based and, all the different layers and all that. But remember that there was an election held in 92 where President Clinton won, and he immediately took missile defense out of space. Okay, I mean, all the space-based stuff was canceled. So I don't know. I
No, that's fair
personally
enough.
I can't divorce um, progress in the United States from political considerations.
Yeah.
Why, you know, why do we not have people on the moon today from the United States? Those are political decisions.
Did you see George Bush change that, or he had the opportunities went too far? Once Clinton took that out, it was difficult. We had policy there to allow us with the Missile Defense
Well,
Act.
I think you got to look again at the times. By the time George W. Bush took office, the United States was in a post-Cold War frame of mind. We had won the Cold War. It was the end of history. And people such as us who would say, you're kidding yourselves, were not frankly listened to. I mean, we were totally soaked up in the war on terror. And the threat that President George W. Bush saw was a rogue threat from Iran or North Korea. The ground missile defense system does a good job against the, one or two launches from a rogue threat. So they were solving a different problem.
And so now you work for the current president. So now we have a new political.
Well, we don't work.
Well, I'm saying, sorry.
We haven't been asked to work.
You're
No,
saying-
the last time he was there.
Yes.
But now this environment now looks to be very positive for looking at this. Do you think or not?
The threat looks different than it did 20 years ago when George W. Bush was in office. It looks very different. Okay, the threat today looks like a resurgent Russia and an insurgent China that is developing. It's in the public literature,
Yes.
developing ICBM capability in the hundreds.
Not to mention the hypersonic threats
Not-
are incredibly impressive.
Thank you. Yeah, and China has developed an offensive layer that fits between, naval gunfire and ICBMs. And that's, as Lisa just mentioned, that's their hypersonic offense for which we.
Where do you think we're going to take the money from? Are we going to take it from we have to get this brand new money to do this?
Neither of us are in policy or finance. And
But I will say that, even if there were no Doge or whatever, there is plenty of opportunity to identify funds within the building to be repurposed. There's a lot of stuff the DoD spends money on that doesn't make sense. So with the activity now very focused on identifying those areas, I would think we could get a good head start tomorrow, honestly, if that money, now that the CR is passed and there's been flexibility given to the DoD. This is a matter of will. And very importantly, this is a matter of talent. So the biggest concern is people with really strong passion and love for this country and all that good stuff we love, but not understanding some of the things they need to understand to put together a credible system. And frankly, therefore being vulnerable to all the charlatans that are going to come in and tell them they got the problem solved. Right.
Yeah.
So that's why, as you had said earlier, the technical background is required to know what to do and what to bet on. Right. And that is going to have to be part of the success formula.
You can bet that our adversaries, the Chinese, are far from stupid, and the Russians are brilliant engineers and mathematicians. If we offer up a non-credible architecture, an architecture that on its face is not suited for the job, they will know that. We're not hiding what we do from knowledgeable people. We're only hiding what we do from ourselves.
Would you, Lisa, would the cost of the offensive stuff be 2 or 3 times more than defensive stuff?
Usually less.
It's usually less. Okay.
Right, because
What's that balance you think that is?
it's always easier to go on offense, right? No matter what.
They always get paid the money. I'm familiar with
No,
offense.
it's not even just that. It's an easier problem. It's an easier problem to be on offense than defense. All it takes is one guy to get through, right? Whereas for offense, you just launch as much as you can. And
But the balance of this, of expenditures between
so
the Golden Dome, is it 50/50?
as we talked before, I think we have to get out of this false duality or false choice. If we start saying offense is more important or less important, we're doing ourselves a disservice.
So the whole package.
The whole package, the whole point here is I heard the president when he was talking, frankly, I thought very effectively about the Chinese threat and the Russian threat. And he's looking at it. I remember I was a kid when Reagan was president. I didn't even get to vote for him. But I remember being inspired by his real genuine desire to eliminate nuclear war as a potential for this. He was serious, and that was his goal. And when I heard Trump talk about this, I similarly felt that's what he's afraid of. He really is afraid of nuclear war, and I'm glad he is. Okay. So when you look at that, you say, how do you achieve that when you have a tripolar world? And that's what he was saying. Look at what China has, look at what Russia has, and look at what we have. We have a tripolar world. The best thing we can do is ensure that nobody pulls that trigger. Now, we know we're not going to because we're not the aggressors here. But we've got to make sure China doesn't. We've got to make sure Russia doesn't. We've got to make sure those two entities don't join up and decide to do it together. And so what I view the dome as, the Golden Dome, now I think it's a better name. The Golden Dome is really about that absolute deterrent. And that's why I'm encouraging, and I was glad they actually called out, when they're talking about non-kinetic, I think they're talking about real left of launch. I think they're talking about obvious cyber things you do. But I'm also saying think strategically about what they are going to have in place and make it clear to them that all of those things will be at risk, whether it's their fusion capabilities and their AI algorithms and how we attack those, whether it's cyber, whether it's all that stuff we were talking about, make it so uncertain for them that they're not going to take the risk. So don't think how much do I spend on offense and how much do I spend on defense. They're not thinking that way. They're not. Why would we think that way? We need to do as much in offense as we can, and we need to make sure that they don't.
Is it offense or defense if I fly a high-powered microwave equipped satellite past a Chinese or Russian asset and fry its electronics? I don't create any debris. I do a close pass and fry its electronics. Is that an offensive or a defensive thing?
If we make it clear we have 2,000 hypersonic weapons ready to launch in Indo-PACOM, is that offense or defense?
Yeah.
We're not going to launch them unless they do something.
I think you
So
said.
sorry, I'm very passionate about this because I don't want people to think this is an either or choice, and I think we do ourselves a disservice. I think we ramp up our production. And by the way, the missile capabilities we're going to need in next gen with EW contested means everything offense or defense needs a seeker. Everything. Okay. Everything's going to need improved range. Everything's going to need the very similar capabilities. So let's just go. Build as much missile capability as we can. Let's figure out and you know what space is great for? You can see everything in space. And you talk to everything in space. But guess what? That means they need space for the same reason. So let's think about space in that way, rather than trying to shoot down ballistic missiles from space and boost space.
Okay.
All right.
And you asked about.
He's getting frustrated.
No, you're good. I just want to keep going.
All right.
Because I want to get the questions out.
All right,
Okay.
But you asked where the money's going to come from. The choices, the nation's policy is about what you decide to do, and it's about what you decide not to do. Okay. And that's a really critical thought. You have to make choices about what you're going to do with your pushing $1 trillion defense budget. There's some things we're not going to be able to do if you want to build the kind of deterrent layer that the president was talking about.
And there's things you don't need to do.
And there's money that you don't need to do.
All right, I'm going to ask Mark to come in. Mark, you've been listening to this, right? The whole conversation. I'd like to offer you a couple minutes here, Mark, on this, and then open it up for questions coming to you from the public.
First, I want to say we're very lucky to have both Dr. Griffin and Lisa here. I think this was an excellent discussion. Very sobering and accurate compared to almost every press release, which are not sobering. They're fairly drunken. And I'll say that first, I agree completely. It is the most sobering fact is the short time frame you have for a boost phase intercept. The reality is this is going to be complex. It's going to involve a lot of mid-course and then in the end, some terminal intercept on these things. And I like the good discussion of the importance of the space base but the recognition there's some underlayer that's still going to be required. And by the way, for the next 5 to 7 years, it's going to be an underlayer. There's not a piece of magic that puts 3,000 or 2,000 or even 1,500 satellites in space over a short period of time. And we've seen with the Space Defense Agency, their launch of the start of their 148, their first 148 satellite tranche has been delayed now a full year from its original, and that is common, not uncommon. And so I really like that. And I love the discussion of the underlayered, with the recognizing that Aegis, VLS, that you're going to need some of that. We just can't go. That's where we can't get drunk again, because those interceptors are in the 10 to 22 million dollars an intercept range right now. I do also argue for, as you know, Riki, for dirigibles, and that I think that plays a role, particularly in glide phase intercept with hypersonics. And to get to Lisa's point, I mean, they've talk about ignoring the offense versus defense and hypersonic missile defense. The actual spending number of the government has been 19 to 1. For every $19 on hypersonic offense, which is normally about $4 billion a year, we have spent $1. So 19 to 1, $19 to $1 on defense. And even in your worst paid year, Riki, the defense of the 49ers got more than 5% of the team salary. And you just can't do that. And, we've taken risk with this over almost, for almost 5 years now. So one last thing I'd say is where the money comes from. Lisa, I never thought you were an optimist, but the idea of reprogramming, the one thing that's driving me crazy is they're saying 6 to 8% will get reprogrammed. They'll be lucky if it's 1 to 2, because they'll reprogram 4 or 5, but they'll be congressional favorites. And in the next budget cycle, they'll be reprogrammed back in. We all know how that game works. Almost as perfidious as the services not getting rid of systems that they should have, is Congress not getting rid of systems built in their district. I do think there's a solution, though. I think the reconciliation bill is going to be between $150 and $200 billion. We'll take the 150. It's going to be split in 4 parts: the nuclear enterprise, shipbuilding, restoring readiness in the 3 services, and missile defense. If missile defense can get its fair share of that almost 40 billion, that's a good jump start. And then some of the savings you pointed, as you start to look at what legacy systems die. So I think over time we could squeeze money out of things. I think initially we're going to need that reconciliation money. But I thought that was a great discussion, Riki. It absolutely was honest and fair about discrimination, about the challenges of discrimination, the real challenges of boost phase, and the fact that you're still going to need some underlayer, but there's an opportunity in space. But thanks very much for leading that. Do you want me to go into the 2? We've got time for 2 or 3 questions for Mike and Lisa. Do you want me to go ahead and put those up?
Yeah. Do you want to have anything to respond to Mark? Or are you good? Yeah. Open up the question.
If they responded to me, that would have been rough, since I think I generally agreed with everything they said. Hey, one of these is, what is the role? And Mike, I think, well, both of you are great on this. How do you envision MDA in this, recognizing the actual Missile Defense Agency and their people and their role in the execution of this? Are they still the architect of missile defense for the Department of Defense?
Want to go first? Do you want me to?
He said you can go first. So
Okay, well, the part of the point we were making earlier, Mark, was that this is a new and more comprehensive enterprise. So saying that a legacy enterprise like MDA can automatically up its game and be in charge of the architectural and acquisition and technical thinking that's required, I think is probably wrong. So there's an awful lot of technical expertise at MDA, at Space Development Agency, in Space Force, frankly, in Navy Aegis and Army THAAD and Patriot, that you want to pull all of those in after some thought, what is determined to be the right way. I would not hand it to any existing agency.
Yeah, and I would add to that I think one of the biggest cultural barriers they have is the way they think about command and control, which in the end, we didn't have enough time to go into that, but the command and control challenge here is just not going to permit the standard way that they think about this problem with centralized control and a man in the middle. That just doesn't work. And I think there are people within MDA that certainly understand that. But to Mike's point, you pull those people in to a separate group that is empowered to do the right thing, as opposed to having to go back and please their boss because there are, rice bowls at risk if they actually speak truth to power.
But Mike, what,
Command and control is
Yeah.
probably the more difficult
Yeah.
problem in this. We actually know how to build interceptors that provably work. We can argue about cost. We know how to build sensors that provably work.
Yeah.
Provably provide fire control quality information. We can argue about cost. We don't yet know how to do the kind of distributed autonomous command and control that is going to be necessary for an actual Golden Dome.
and that's got to be offense. That's got to be everything.
That's got to be
For
everything.
the entire joint force.
Yep.
That's right.
But let me just go back to MDA, because aren't they are the experts or have the depth of knowledge on space intercept with the EKV and all that knowledge. We're not going to, if we're going to do space intercept.
Neither one of us said even once that we would not avail ourselves of the knowledge.
Right.
What we said was, this is a more integrated problem than any agency, any service has
Okay.
yet dealt with, and you need to start fresh.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Exactly. And
the-
you need the people who really do understand the problem to be able to attack it without concerns about the equities that are challenged if they bring truth to power.
So,
That's,
Riki,
that's the reality.
one thing I wanted to add, but I'm glad Dr. Griffin said cost at least 3 times that answer, because he's right. One of the things that drives me crazy is the way that we drive competition out of the program by trying to down select to a single missile as fast as possible. You and I saw this in hypersonic glide phase defense, where you would like 2 companies right now. If you go down to one company fast, one solution, I don't even want to say one company, one solution fast, you guarantee a non-competitive environment over time in the costing of that weapon. And that's what we've seen happen, is really significant increases in the cost of weapons after they're picked. And I just think one of the things we need to kind of insist on is whether it's in the space-based systems, whether it's in the underlayer systems, that we emphasize competition. America kicks butt, our businesses do, in competition. But for some reason, inside the defense industrial base, we drill that out.
You're singing our tune, Mark. I mean,
Yes,
how many times do you want us to say we agree?
Yeah,
I got nothing good.
totally agree with you.
Hey, Mark,
Yeah.
can you bring up, I didn't articulate correctly enough, but can you bring up the Guam situation?
The Guam
And how
situation-
this is somewhat looking like that today
It's a
on how they're solving this
microcosm.
problem? Huh?
This is where Dr. Griffin was exactly, well, both Lisa and Dr. Griffin said, you can't use the existing system. Literally, the Guam system, if they replicate what they did for Guam, in other words, in terms of assigning architectures and responsibilities the same way they did for Guam, it's going to be a grotesque misappropriation of fund. I mean, Guam was a $2 billion waste of money. This will far exceed that if
Yeah.
they do that. And what happened in Guam was they allowed a small unit within the joint staff to articulate an idea not based in engineer, with a handful of engineers, 1 or 2 engineers, not 10 or 20 or 40 or 60, to articulate a theory, pass it to a portion of DoD CAPE that doesn't historically do
Right.
mission architectures.
Correct.
And shockingly, when you had
Shockingly.
poor architects give something to poor, developer, poor is the wrong word. People, insufficient architects to give it to an organization not based on designing and producing a plan.
Right.
Amazingly, it was a cluster. And
Right.
I would say in the defense of Guam, it's fair to say that 4.5 years after, or 4 years after we started, we have very little to show except for $2 billion in bills and a lot of bad blood between services, MDA,
Yep.
CAPE, and the joint staff that is going to make what we've just discussed here even harder. The fact that there's already, many of these people are in their same jobs or back in a more senior job if they're military.
Yep.
And I just think it's not, this is one of the main reasons I would stipulate you may have to have a senior person over the existing things, like Mike was arguing for, someone fresh, because the current system is coming off not just a loss. They're coming off like a New Orleans Saints 0-16 season, you know.
No, totally agree. That's what we were trying to say. And that person has to be in charge of everything. Absolutely.
And it wasn't just me that was saying that, it was Lisa as well.
So I want to ask there's one final question here, Riki, in our time remaining, but it's one I think it's implied in all the answers, but wasn't stated. But how much emphasis do we need to put on survivability and resilience in this space-based layer, given emerging Russian and Chinese cyber and other space-based threats?
That has to be part of it for sure. Everything that, we were talking about in terms of thinking ahead to what they're going to do the same with us. And that's the way it's always been, and that's the way it will always be. So yes, that has to be part of the calculus for sure.
I guess I'd also bring up today's article on observing, we're observing China do what they call dogfighting in space, which is, but it's a I love the Air Force, Space Force still got a lot of Air Force in them.
Yeah.
But the idea that satellites are maneuvering in a way that clearly shows a threatening posture, they
Correct.
appear to have tools that could impact another satellite.
That is correct.
Yeah, that's the point of their demonstration, and that's what we're saying.
And we should be doing that too. There's no reason we can't be doing that. Rather than just, hemming and hawing over how horrible that is, let's just make it clear we can do the same.
And I love that, and I love that at no point have we had to explain that the space treaty does not actually apply to anything we have said. It says none of us have said, I'm planning on putting a nuclear warhead on one of my satellites and flying it around in a threatening manner. None of us have violated the International Space Treaty. Riki, I wanted to pass it back to you to see if you want to get
great
final comments from the two. Just because
we'll get a final comments on the discussion today. Lisa, we'll start with you.
So yeah, I've never been called an optimist before, so that was kind of nice. I do know that if people are willing to just do what has to be done and not worry about getting their promotion. I mean, Rickover retired as a 3-star. The people that Mike cited were all people who ultimately got punished for being bold and brave, but I don't think they would do it differently. So you can actually move money around. I mean, the things Mike and I did when we were in the building to get stuff started, we didn't make any friends. We were not well loved, but we didn't care. So I don't mean to sound so much as an optimist as to be championing people who are willing to do whatever it takes to get it done. And, if you got the president of the United States behind you, then that should be sufficient to tell people to go pound sand when they start getting in your way. But I would say with regard to the EO, I think we have to make sure that we do the right things. We've emphasized that. Don't waste the money on the bad stuff. Don't waste the time on the bad stuff. And there are things we can do in 18 months. Experiments or demonstrations, I should say, on a variety of examples that were just brought up today. That would be quite compelling, I think, to both Russia and China, and remind them, we're not going to sit back on our heels and just admire what you guys are doing. We can do everything you do and more. That's really what we have to make sure that they understand.
Well, I would echo what she said. I don't need to repeat it. Mark was talking about congressional rice bowls and moving money being an impediment. If winning your next election or getting your next promotion for a leader is more important than getting the job done, then we're doomed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I agree with that.
there are many things we're buying today for the DoD that are not relevant to a peer conflict with China and Russia in a tripolar world. And it's not that hard to go through and figure out what the totem pole is and what should come off the bottom in order to create that which needs to be done at the top.
Yep.
Thank you, Mike. This has been a great discussion at a timely place before this thing.
Well, this is a great executive order.
Yeah.
And I mean, leaving aside
Some of the details.
but this is a great executive order.
Today, you framed this thing for us, not wasting money on boost phase space defense.
Right.
Focused on the space-based stuff that we've done, creating some wins that we could do in 18 months.
Yep. That are very credible. Yep.
Reflecting on the inefficiency of the process that we'll live with.
Yep,
That was built,
Yep.
right, Mike, for North Korea. It was
Yep.
built for North Korea, a small threat. And we have now, we are playing with the big boys,
Mhm.
and we have to have everything
That's exactly right.
available. And this has got to be tooled, and it's got to be relooked at it correctly. So I think that the discussion is so timely and so important. And I appreciate your candor and truth and your experience from what you've done. So thank you for this discussion. Mark, thank you. Really appreciate coming on this.